Do you remember the last time someone truly saw you? Not just looked at you, but actually saw you? Amid a crowd feigning politeness, that boy had never smiled, nor had he ever spoken. He simply sat there, in his little suit, quietly watching the piano, and the waitress, the only one who knelt down, without asking anyone's permission, did so simply because she saw he was waiting to be lifted. A small act, but it opened the door to the truth the wealthiest father in the room had to face. His son had been silent because he himself had never truly listened. Julian Whitmore never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Simply stepping into a boardroom, the faint scent of his expensive cologne drifting from his Italian suit was enough to make everyone straighten their chairs. In the 20 years he spent building Whitmore Medical into America's leading orthopedic device empire, Julian never lost a contract because he understood the rule of power. The less you speak, the more people listen. And it was within that very silence that he tried to raise a boy. Caleb, Julian's only son, was born out of loss. His mother Lillian did not survive the C-section. The name Caleb, meaning courage, was chosen on a silent night, accompanied by the steady beeps of medical monitors and a death certificate laid beside his birth certificate. Julian never truly recovered, but he refused to fall. Instead, he chose to build a world without flaws, where everything was scheduled, every emotion boxed up, and every uncertainty eliminated before it could occur. Caleb was not like that. The boy arrived with legs that could not move, but what hurt Julian even more was Caleb's gaze. Not resentful, not frightened, just eyes far too still for a child, as if the boy had learned early on that he had no right to ask for anything more. Julian hired the best therapists, the finest schools, the top doctors, the lightest wheelchairs on the market, but the boy did not speak, did not cry, did not laugh. He simply sat back straight, hands resting on his thighs, head tilted slightly like a tiny soldier forced to practice endurance before ever learning play. Every Tuesday evening, Julian brought his son to Meridian, a quiet, upscale restaurant where no one asked too many questions. He always reserved the same corner table, ordered the same dishes at the same time in the same seats. Caleb sat beside him, the wheelchair positioned not to block the waitstaff's path. He did not eat much, nor say a word. He only watched the grand piano play center stage in the dining room. Week after week. Julian noticed but never asked. He assumed it was a habit, a visual comfort. He did not realize that for Caleb, that piano was the only warm thing in the room, because it recalled something or someone that had been lost before the boy even knew a name to call. The piano had once belonged to Lillian. She played it each night before bed. While alive, her playing had been the last sound Caleb heard in his mother's womb. After her death, Julian could not bear to hear it any longer. He donated the piano to the restaurant not as a gift, but as a silent punishment for the memory. And so it sat there, a mute scar in the gleaming room. Caleb never asked, but his eyes never wavered. They stayed fixed on the piano not because he wanted to play, but because he was waiting for permission to step forward. Julian didn't know how to give it. He was not cruel. He was just a man who, after years of total control, began to believe that even love needed a procedure. Everything would have continued quietly, efficiently, in perfect order if that night had not happened. The night his son vanished from his wheelchair in an instant. Have you ever lost control not because it was taken, but because someone dared to do what you never would?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
Emily Sanders wore no name tag. She had no degree hanging on a wall. The only things she brought to her evening shift were her faded canvas shoes, a scratched water tray, and a gaze that knew how to see the empty spaces others had long learned to avoid. She had served at Meridian for over 3 years, not for glamorous guests or generous tips, but because it was quiet here, quiet enough for her to hear her own heart, even after a day of running between tables without rest. May in Savannah was heavy with humidity, but inside Meridian the air was cool. The space draped in layers of white linen and bathed in classic golden light, as if everything here were designed to make people feel small before such elegance. But Emily had never felt small. She did not need to be big. She only needed to be present. That evening, as always, Emily walked the hallway behind the stage to refill water for the VIP table in the corner Julian Whitmore's table. She never spoke to him. She had never heard him speak. But she knew precisely that the only thing that changed each week at that table was his tie. Every other detail, from the silverware to the placement of the child's wheelchair, remained as if lifted from the same photograph. And it was that child Caleb who made Emily pause. He sat not far from the stage, small hands clutching the rim of his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes never blinked, fixed on the grand piano, as if, should he look away, it would vanish. Emily did not know his name, but she had seen that look before in children left behind at the public school health office, in elderly patients no one came to pick up after therapy. It was the look of someone waiting for a miracle, knowing full well it would not arrive. She set her water tray on a nearby stand, not making a sound. Then, without hesitation, without glancing at his father, without waiting for her manager's nod, Emily stepped forward and knelt down. No introduction, no asking permission. Just one soft question, like a breath of wind. "Wanna try, kid?" Caleb did not answer, but he did not turn away. He did not resist. He did not pull back. And so Emily slipped her arms around his back, one hand under his knees, the other at his midspine. He was as light as a forgotten memory, and so fragile she nearly feared she might hurt him simply by thinking it. She lifted him up gently, as if raising an unwritten piece of music. Her steps were unhurried yet sure. She moved past doubtful stares, paused forks in midair, and lips holding wine caught in sudden silence. Emily did not look at them. She looked at Caleb. She placed him on the piano bench, a bench that had grown cold long ago. She supported his back until he sat upright. His small legs dangled, not touching the floor. But his hands hovered above empty air, just inches from the waiting black and white keys. Emily did not urge him. She did not gesture. No whistle, no excessive smile. She only stepped back just enough for Caleb to know she remained there, yet that he could choose to do nothing at all. In the room, accustomed to recorded jazz playing softly, a new kind of silence emerged. Not the polite hush of courtesy, but true waiting. Caleb still had not played, but his fingers began to tremble ever so slightly in the air, and Emily, with all her uncertified experience, stood still, so that if a miracle arrived, it would know it was welcome. Perhaps some people are born not to be applauded, but to touch the right person at the right moment and change the course of their life forever. My dear viewers, stay tuned for the story that will leave you in awe. Please take a moment to like and subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to see friends joining us from around the world. The room felt stretched taut by an invisible thread. Every spoon clinked, every whispered word, every small movement quietly disappeared. Only a dense stillness remained, where no one knew what to do, so everyone just watched. Emily still stood there, one hand gently resting on Caleb's back as if she were a natural extension of the piano bench. Her gaze found no one in the room. It simply waited for the boy before her to breathe. No urging, no expectation, no need for results, just being there as an unseen support. Caleb sat up straight. His small shoulders trembled like a leaf in late autumn. His left hand reached out, pausing above the keyboard. Not touching, just hovering, as if the boy wondered whether his hand was allowed to imprint itself on something so beautiful. Emily said nothing, but her hand softly lifted his wrist, not with force, but with presence. She guided his index finger onto middle C, the first key, poised between the black and white world like a starting point. Then she whispered, almost inaudibly, "Just one note. You don't have to play music." Caleb pressed down. The piano rang out, pure yet imperfect, fragile as a dream hesitating between appearing and vanishing. It had no technique, no flawless sustain, but it carried something the room had never heard before, the truth. The sound wasn't loud, but it resonated like the first knock on a door that had been locked for nearly a decade. Julian sprang to his feet. He did not shout, yet the leather chair beneath him groaned under his movement. A napkin slipped to the floor like an exclamation point in an atmosphere bound by protocol. His face was taut as glass, expressionless, yet easily shattered. He strode forward each step, slicing through the wooden floor. The entire restaurant seemed drawn toward him. Diners' eyes tracked him, but no one dared speak. With every step he took, the air grew heavier. He stopped a single arm's length behind Emily. No need to raise his voice. He simply let a single, meticulously sharpened question fall. "Who do you think you are to presume you had the right to do that?" Emily did not turn around. She did not lower her shoulders, bow, or defend herself. She simply held her ground, her eyes still on the child, as if the rest of the world no longer existed. Because in that moment, no authority mattered more than the moment a child spoke for the first time. Caleb did not look back at his father. Instead, he turned his head to the left and fixed his gaze on the one person who had not told him what to do, who did not threaten, lecture, or correct, who had simply chosen to see him when everyone else merely looked through him. Then he leaned his head against Emily's shoulder. A gentle touch, not exactly seeking shelter, nor precisely a thank you. It was like how he had once nestled against his mother in the womb, a primal instinct to reclaim the safety that had been stripped away so early. Emily did not move. She did nothing more. Because sometimes, simply staying is action enough. Julian stood there witnessing his son, who had never touched anyone, never leaned on anyone, now turning to a stranger for support. Not to him, not to the one who had paid for every treatment, but to a nameless waitress. And in that moment, every rule he had ever believed righteous began to crack. Had he been defending love all this time, or merely a defense system cloaked in order? Emily left the restaurant at the end of her shift as she had every night before, except for one thing. She was no longer permitted to return. No threats, no discussion, just a cold, concise sentence from the manager. "Here, we don't want anyone to become the center of attention." No one escorted her to the door. No, thank you. No eyes followed her. Emily's footsteps echoed softly on the stone corridor, mingling with the clink of spoons and glasses in the dining room where the world had swiftly slipped back into place, as if no child had ever touched that piano. She did not react, nor did she look back. She merely folded her apron, set it on the chair in the staff room, and walked away with the calm of someone long accustomed to not being asked to stay. 3 days later, Julian's mansion remained flawless as always, the floors polished every morning, mirrors without a single smudge. And the grandfather clock in the foyer chimed on the hour, each echo reverberating against the cold stone walls. But something had changed. Caleb no longer sat at the dinner table. He no longer strolled through the garden with his nurse as before. Instead, He had vanished into a stillness more strange than the silence Julian habitually imposed as an unspoken rule in his home. On Tuesday afternoon, Julian happened to pass the music room. The door stood slightly ajar, unusual, for that room had long been merely decorative, unused. When he pushed it open, a chill swept in not from the air conditioning but from the very atmosphere fractured within. Sheets of music lay scattered across the floor, torn mercilessly. What had once been neatly arranged scores now lay crumpled and warped, some pages stained with tears. Sonatas were split in two, music book covers ripped from their spines, abandoned like evidence of a whirlwind no one witnessed. Julian froze in the doorway. For a moment, he felt as though he'd stepped into an alien space, one he could not control. Then his gaze settled on the piano bench. Affixed to its front was a scrap of school-ruled paper taped on with clear cellophane, askew yet firm enough not to fall. The scrawled message gripped him, as though written by a hand that had never learned to loosen its hold. The piano only works when she's there. No name, no punctuation, but enough to crack something in Julian that he'd always believed was steel. His hand, once steady through hundreds of million-dollar contracts, once calm while holding champagne flutes at countless funerals, now trembled. Not from anger, nor from fear, but because for the first time in years, he wasn't certain he still controlled himself. He quietly stepped to the bench and sat down, the note still in place, a silent judgment. Beyond the glass door shimmered the manicured garden, its hedges trimmed to perfection. Yet inside him, everything churned as chaotically as that ravaged room. Julian retrieved his phone. He opened the restaurant's security camera app. He entered the code, accessed the fateful day. The footage appeared, crisp, as though time had frozen. Caleb in his wheelchair, eyes locked on the piano. Emily stepping forward, bending down, no one asking permission. And then she lifted the boy gently. Without ceremony, without introduction. Julian pressed play. The first note sounded, neither round nor perfect, yet it carried a timbre no professionally recorded version ever had. A summons. He hit replay. Again and again. Not from curiosity, not to analyze, but because he was searching for something, a shard of feeling he'd never named, surging like a storm long confined. He didn't notice himself leaning toward the screen, fingers brushing his lips not to ponder, but as a reflex to keep himself from shattering. Some sounds do not merely pass through the ear, but strike the memory. They tap on locks you thought were sealed. And there are people like Emily who need not utter a word, yet compel you to listen with the rest of your life. My dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a sip of water and stay tuned for the surprising developments ahead. Comment 1 if you found this story moving, so we know you're still here. That afternoon, sunlight slanted across the roof of the small community center tucked behind a stand of red maples south of Savannah. There were no gilded iron gates, no gleaming signs, nor receptionists in suits. But there was one thing Julian had never seen anywhere else, peace that did not need proving. He entered, unannounced, without warning. No one stopped him. No one asked for his business card. Only his footsteps on the worn tile led him down a corridor, toward the uneven piano notes drifting from the room at its end. Clumsy but courageous notes, music not for performance, but simply because it was allowed to exist. He found Emily in the final room on the hall, no lectern, no stage. Just an old upright piano, a few repainted wooden chairs, and several children seated around it. One missing her right arm, another with a small respirator strapped to his shoulder. Emily was not surprised to see him. She looked up, her hand pausing on the keys, as if she'd known he would arrive not today, perhaps, but eventually. Her nod was as light as a breath, neither formal nor distant. Simply, I see you. Julian said nothing. He set down on the floor a canvas-wrapped package, not heavy, yet carried in both hands as though it contained something more important than wood and cloth. Carefully, he peeled back the fabric layer by layer. With each fold, a fragment of memory emerged. The piano's leg restored, the seat newly polished, old scratches reduced to marks of time. Finally, the inscription was revealed, carved into the wood at the front, Caleb Whitmore's first performance. Emily bent closer. She said nothing. She reached out and traced the engraving with her finger, reading it by touch, not by sight but by the part of her heart that had once cracked for forgotten children. She did not say thank you, nor did she ask questions. She simply looked up and met Julian's gaze, not with gratitude, not with forgiveness, but with the look of someone who has stood in the eye of the storm and understands that only those who have been knocked down learn when to bow. Then she smiled gently, without drama or artifice. A smile like sunlight through an old window, no blaze of brilliance, but a warming of the room. "So," she said, her voice no louder than a lullaby, "it seems that seat has finally found its rightful owner." Julian remained silent, but his shoulders seemed to lower just a bit, not in fatigue, but because he no longer needed to keep everything upright. He surveyed the room, children's doodles taped to the walls, small toy pianos with chipped keys, and that old upright with a pencil scrawl across its lid. Playing wrong is still playing. Julian could not remember the last time he'd sat in a room without an agenda, nor how long it had been since he'd seen his son's name written large in public, not as a patient, but as an artist. He bent forward and touched the edge of the bench. The carved wood was solid, but it carried a simple truth. Caleb had played a single note, and for the first time, someone wanted the whole world to know. Is there any greater gift than being called by your true name in a place where you were once only a shadow at the dinner table? The old community hall tonight was illuminated by a light far more special than any row of stage lights. Anticipation. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, the emerald velvet curtains swept to either side, and center stage stood a small grand piano, polished so meticulously that every overhead spotlight was reflected in its surface. The inaugural performance of Keys Unspoken, a project for children who have never been heard in the usual way, had arrived. Caleb was wheeled onto the stage. There was no musical introduction, no grand announcement. Just a boy in a simple white shirt, round frame glasses, and hair combed to one side, his small legs dangling above the piano bench. His hands rested lightly on his lap, trembling. But his gaze was unwavering, not toward the audience, but toward one person, the man seated in the center row, in a casual jacket and without a tie. Julian Whitmore. No one whispered. No one glanced at their phone. Everyone looked up, not because he was a millionaire's son, but because he was a child about to find his own voice. Caleb sat for a few seconds. Backstage, Emily Sanders placed a hand over her heart, not to calm herself, but to ensure her heartbeat matched that reverent silence. A soft sound rang out, not from the piano, but from Caleb leaning forward to press the first key. One note. Then two. There was no melody, no rhythm, just presence. Each note was like an ink droplet falling onto still water, sending ripples farther than the distance between the stage and the front row. Caleb did not look around, but his hands no longer shook. He tilted his head toward the low-hung microphone beside the piano. His voice emerged, not loud, not polished, but unmistakable, as if it had been waiting to escape for 9 silent years. "Dad, I'm playing this note because you're watching." Time seemed to freeze. A few parents gripped their children's hands. Some patrons held their breath. Yet in the center row, Julian did not close his eyes. He did not bow his head. He did not wipe away tears. He stood. He did not shout. He said nothing. He merely stood tall, hands clasped at his chest. Then he applauded. Once, decisively. Then again, once more. No cue was needed, but the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause was neither frantic nor stylized, but unanimous, each person in that hall understanding they had witnessed something more precious than perfection, truth. Caleb bowed his head, not out of shyness, not out of fear, but because for the first time, he knew he no longer had to hide anything behind his wheelchair. Backstage, Emily took a single step back, not to leave, but to let the light fall fully on Caleb. She stood there, arms relaxed, her eyes not wet but profound, because you need not shed tears to know you have witnessed something sacred. After the performance, no one asked Emily what lesson she had taught the boy. No one asked Julian how much he'd sponsored. The only thing that remained was the image of a child once framed by silence, now called by name and heard with all the hearts around him. In a world where noise often drowns out truth, a child needn't speak much to be truly listened to. They only need to be seen at the right moment, and by the right person. There are stories that don't need words. There are notes that don't need melody. And there are moments like when a child with paralysis lifts his eyes to look at his father that remind us of the most important thing, to be seen. In a busy world where attention is a scarce resource, perhaps the greatest gift you can give someone is your presence. No advice needed, no solutions required. Just stand there and listen with your heart. If this story reminds you of someone who truly saw you, lifted you up when you couldn't believe in yourself, please leave a comment below. Tell us about them. And if you believe there are children out there still waiting to be heard, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Because here, every note has a reason to be played.